However, sometimes hard to gauge the audience when I'm talking to a screen. That said, there should be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So please ask as many questions as you can via the method you've been told, or ask for clarity on any of the points covered. You should never start a presentation with an apology, but I will. I'm just recovering from a cold, so if I start sniffling or coughing, I do hope it doesn't distract too much from the presentation. Well, I say a cold, my wife said it's a cold. For me, it feels more like flu, but hopefully it won't detract. So I'll start by sharing my slides. Just please let me know when that's on. So hopefully CH-47 operations in Mali is in front of you all.
Yes, we can see the screen now, David. Yes.
Great. Thanks, George. So the content of the brief is as follows. I'll give a brief introduction on me, my background, and then we will start with a scene set of video before going into the main body of the presentation. The presentation has been constructed from open source material, and the level of discussion will have to be unclass owing to the mechanism of delivery. However, I hope my experiences and observations from my deployment there will help you understand Mali and how we, the UK Chinook force, operate. So, as David said, my name is Wing Commander Paul Butler. I've been in the Royal Air Force about 18.5 years now, and I'm the current officer commanding number 27 Squadron. We're based out of RAF Odium in Hampshire. I joined the Royal Air Force direct from university, progressed to helicopter training, initially on the Squirrel and Bell 412 helicopters at RAF Shawbury, which is in Shropshire, before receiving my wings and moving to the front line on EH-101 Merlin helicopters at RAF Benson, based in Oxfordshire. Whilst on the Merlin Force, I spent 7 years deployed on multiple operations in Iraq, and really learning my trade growing as an aviator. I was then selected to become aide de camp, so an assistant, if you will, to the now late Sir Chris Moran in his role as Commander-in-Chief Air. Completely out of my comfort zone, I might add, but I learnt more about the Royal Air Force and being an officer in that year than I had the previous 7, which was very much support helicopter focused. During that time and that year, I was also fortunate enough to celebrate the People's Liberation Army Air Force 60th anniversary in Beijing and visit the Pentagon along with the Lockheed Martin factory in Dallas-Fort Worth to see the UK F-35s on the production line. Returning to the Merlin Force, I then deployed for 4 months to Afghanistan before being promoted and moving to the permanent joint headquarters as SOT J3 Air, where I spent just over 2 years, pretty much seeing most of the world. Selected for command, I was posted to number 27 Squadron as a flight commander in 2013 and was fortunate enough to go back to Afghanistan twice, once on full spectrum Op Herrick, and secondly to bring the CH-47 out of Kabul and Afghanistan on Op Tobble. Handing over to the Puma Force in 2015. Promoted to Wing Commander in 2016, I spent 2 years at the Release to Service Authority in Bristol and 1 year at the Defence Academy in Shrivenham, before taking command of number 27 Squadron in November last year. Deploying to Mali this summer for 3 months, I have the recency of Chinook operations in Mali, hence why I've been asked to talk to you this evening. So now moving into the main body of the presentation. So this is a quick video, which hopefully will work owing to IT. It's a little under 4 minutes long and was aired in August last year. So while some of the facts have changed and the narrative has moved on, it does give you a good background to Mali and why British forces are deployed there.
Mali, a key West African country on the brink of chaos. Its president and prime minister now ousted in a military coup. What does that mean for the British military who are deployed there and for the troops who are due to go out on a peacekeeping mission later this year? Why does Mali matter so much?
Mali is strategic, particularly because most Western, I would say, European countries see the rise of Islamic terrorism, see that as a threat to instability in the region, but also there is this sort of idea that if we allow West Africa to become a breeding ground for jihadism or jihadist groups, this could spread into to Western Europe.
UK troops are already based in Mali. 3 RAF Chinooks are supporting the French counter-insurgency mission in the region, with just over 5,000 troops fighting militant groups.
There are other components. For example, there are elements where they're supposed to be looking at, for example, development and whatnot. But the front focus of these missions are really to eradicate the terrorist groups.
But even as things change in Mali, 250 British troops are training right now to join a separate United Nations mission in Mali, an 18,000 strong international peacekeeping force.
It's designed to support the political process and carry out a number of security and stabilization tasks. And its focus really is about the population. It's about trying to stabilize the situation, protect civilians, monitor human rights, the creation of conditions for humanitarian provision to be able to pass through. But in essence, what it has struggled to do is to keep up to its mandate, largely because of the way in which terrorists have been mobile and moved in and around the country as well.
The task would take British troops onto the front line, but fighting the insurgency is not in their remit as it stands.
Our role is really more about understanding how the violence is affecting the local population and what we can do to counter that, not trying to in some way go toe-to-toe with the enemy and getting in a scrap.
Instead, UK troops would move to remote areas, gathering intelligence to support wider operations.
It is speaking to all the various groups, the different ethnicities, the different villages, the different political factions, and understanding what it is that's driving disorder and disunity in that area.
The situation on the ground in Mali is now more complicated, with a military coup ousting the Prime Minister and the President.
To understand the coup, you have to understand the political crisis. And so, unfortunately, in Mali, corruption was ongoing and had been little effort to actually tackle corruption for the last few years. The general security of the country had gone downhill and it had spread to neighboring countries. But it's also believed that the mutiny, which started out as a mutiny and ended up being a coup, was also over low salaries. A lot of the soldiers weren't paid enough. And due to this was one of the reasons why the military had rebelled, as it were, against the state.
But how could the coup change the UK military's role in Mali?
It's unlikely that we'll see the pullout of the Chinook helicopters anytime soon, because they are supporting French troops there. So, like I said, it's unlikely that the UK would just pull out troops. It's more likely that at this point people are sort of pausing to think about what next.
So hopefully that video gave you a good idea and a little bit of the background about Mali, UK and French involvement, and some of the challenges that the country faces. On the next slide, and I don't want to wish to insult anyone's intelligence, however, I found this little fact sheet really informative. While I knew where Mali was, I hadn't quite appreciated how vast and diverse a country it was. So it's in the Sahel region, and quite a large country. As you can see, Mali is in fact the 8th largest country in Africa, with an area of just over 1.2 million square kilometres. The population is close to 20 million, 67% of which are estimated to be under the age of 25. And that census was taken in 2017. Its capital and largest city is Bamako. Just to put that into context in terms of size, Mali is probably 5 times bigger than the UK and 1.8 times bigger than Texas. So the Republic of Mali is located in the interior of West Africa, north of the equator, reaching to the Tropic of Cancer. It's a landlocked country, sharing its borders with 7 other African nations. Mali stretches across 3 different climatic regions. To the south is the tropical Sudanese savanna, wooded grasslands broken occasionally by cliffs and rock formations, and watered by the Niger and Senegal rivers and their tributaries. In the middle and semi-arid lands of the Sahel, dry, sandy plains dotted with sparse trees and bushes, and a vast plateau broken by isolated rocky masses characterise this transitional zone between the savannah and the desert to the north. The middle area comprises the rock of Hombori, the desert zones, the rock of Hombori, and actually the middle plain is pretty much where we operate predominantly. The desert zone to the north covers the largest area of Mali and is a hot barren plain whose terrain is contoured by sand dunes and rocky outcrops with very little vegetation other than occasional patches of thorn bush. So conditions in Mali are pretty extreme and as such carry quite an engineering burden, but more of that a little later. So to just give a little bit more context as to why the UK commitment is there, there are two distinct moments, certainly in recent history, involving two different prime ministers as to why the UK is there. So France's deployment to the Sahel region of West Africa began in 2013. The sparsely populated area just to the south of Sahara is a hotspot of Islamic militancy, and the Malian government asked France for military assistance. The British government gave its support to France in 2013 through Operation Newcomb, an ongoing mission initially announced by the then Prime Minister David Cameron in January 2013. Initially, the ask was for logistical support on RAF C-17 aircraft transporting French armoured vehicles and equipment to Mali. 5 years later, with French troops still deployed in the region, French President Emmanuel Macron requested British reinforcements such as summit with Theresa May at the Sandhurst Military Academy. The RAF agreed to send 3 Chinooks along with 50 to 60 support staff later that summer. The provision was to provide 100 hours per month to support the French. So now a little bit about that deployment size and some of the roles that we perform and some of the performance of the CH-47. So the 1310 flight is the number apportioned to the deployed CH-47 detachment, which in Mali is located at Gao Airfield alongside our French colleagues. The detachment is now 100 strong personnel, and that's manned from all 3 services, albeit the majority are from the RAF, and specifically from RAF Odeon. 18 and 27 Squadron are responsible for and the delivery of the capability, although are supported by 28 and 7 Squadron on occasion. The aircraft deployed can be a mix of Mark 6 Alphas and Mark 5s, and I'll explain a little bit more about their capabilities later. There are currently 4 aircraft in theatre. The National Component Commander is at Wing Commander level, or SO1, and is a rotational 6-month deployment. And by rotational, I mean that each service will take it in turn. When I was there, it was a Navy commander. He handed over to an RAF Wing Commander, who in turn will hand over to an Army Lieutenant Colonel early next year. The National Component Commander, so NCC on the slide, is the red card holder and our main conduit with the French. As a red card holder, he or she can cease operations if they deem the ask to be outside of what we are cleared to do, or if they perceive the risk, for whatever reason, to be too high. That said, our operating capability and provision from Newcomb is so clearly defined and understood that I do not recount a time when the NCC had to intervene. So in terms of the roles the Chinook will perform, the Chinook is an extremely capable and highly versatile helicopter, of which I'm sure most of you are aware. And it can be operated from land bases or ships into a diverse range of environments, from the Arctic to the jungle, or what we see in Mali, predominantly desert. The aircraft, when deployed, is usually armed and is fitted with a suite of self-defense equipment, allowing it to operate across the battle space. Chinooks are primarily used for trooping, resupply, and battlefield casualty evacuation. More of that later. With its triple hook external load system, internal cargo winch, roller conveyor fit, and large reserves of power, the aircraft can lift a wide variety of complex underslung or internal freight, including vehicles. It can carry up to 55 troops or up to approximately 10 tons of mixed cargo. However, that is depending on where we operate from, and I'll come on to that later. In addition to its traditional warfighter role, it has a number of secondary roles and have included search and rescue, although more likely supporting a wide variety of specialist tasks, which include military aid to the civil authorities, also known as MACA. Currently in the UK, my squadron has 1 Chinook and crew at 2 hours notice to move, ready to respond to emergencies, and we hold that role 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That is when we're not deployed in Mali. When we do deploy, we will hand that role over to our sister squadron, 18. In recent years, the MACA tasks have included resupplying snowbound farmers in Northern Ireland and moving tons of aggregate to help reconstruct flood defences damaged by winter storms. In August 2019, 27 Squadron and the Chinook was instrumental in securing a dam on the Toddbrook Reservoir after it became structurally unsound. So on the slide there, you can see personnel recovery. And whilst we're not providing a JPR role, there was an example in 2019 where 2 CH-47s conducting trooping overheard on the radio of an aircraft that was downed due to an engine fire. The aircraft responded quickly, went to the location of the French helicopter, landed on, dispatched all 50 French soldiers and recovered those aircraft. So there's an open source video you can find on that. If you just put crew recovered by British Chinook, you will get the background to all that story. But what types of aircraft do we have currently in theatre? So the current operational Chinook fleet is flying Mark 6 Alphas and Mark 5s, in addition to Mark 6s on our sister squadron. All the aircraft are fitted with digital glass cockpits to a common standard. As part of the upgrade programme, all aircraft have been fitted with a digital automatic flying control system, also known as DAFIX, which greatly enhances handling and safety, particularly when operating in recirculating dust and snow conditions. Anecdotally, and in fact through my own experiences, having flown Mark 2s, 4s, 3s and 5s, the Mark 6 and 5 with its new DAFIX is absolutely a world beater, and it does give capacity in terms of when you brown out, i.e. at the bottom of the approach into dust, it really does give the pilot and crew the capacity to pretty much go wherever we want in any conditions. The Mark 5 is the upgrade of the extended range Mark 3, also known as the Fat Tank aircraft, which carries double the fuel load of the standard Chinook. It is expected that all types will continue to play a key role in UK defence activity, with the Chinook sustainment programme aiming to build on the platform's success, recapitalising existing airframes and extending the capability out to 2040. In 2018, the US State Department approved foreign military sale of 14 extended range Chinooks to the UK, a deal that will see the RAF expand or replace some of its earliest frames. In Mali, the aircraft has been an absolute capability enhancer, providing a body of lift, both packs and freight, in support of the French. And for me, Mali is a great area to operate. Not only is it vast, but also the density altitudes you encounter with terrain, with the heat. It really does mean my crews have to think about what they're doing. They can be forgiven at times to just have more power than they need. But when operating in Mali at long range, with troops carrying lots of internal and external freight and encountering those extremes, they really do have to think about what power they have, what their options are, where they can get fuel. So I've thoroughly enjoyed my time out there, and I know the crews do too, albeit it is a bit of a mental challenge. So what can't we do? We are there to support the French in non-direct combat, that is, we do combat support. So therefore, no such thing as aerial assaults, and no such thing as prisoner transfer. But the operational capability certificate for us deployed in Mali prohibits both of those two, which I've just mentioned. So our function is solely combat support and more recently medevac. The slide in this picture I took in May this year, and is a sandstorm that came into Gower Airfield. When they hit you, you really do know about it. And one of the extremes of weather, we say, throughout the year, and it normally comes from around May time for a good few months. Associated at that time of year as well is heavy rain, lightning, hail, turbulence, changing winds in the vicinity of cumulonimbus clouds, and it all happens to extremes. Being on the ITCZ, so the Intertropical Convergence Zone, means there is just so much energy in the atmosphere, and therefore the rest, as you can imagine, is quite biblical, Old Testament. So these conditions clearly impact the aircraft and the engineering of them, and therefore, where possible, clearly we like to keep the aircraft under shelter in these conditions. Although on occasion they happen so quickly you do get caught out. That said, when a Chinook lands in dust, even in benign conditions, the dust that is blown engulfs the aircraft, and that impacts the blades, the most of which are moving close to the speed of sound. As such, our engineers have to routinely repaint them, so that impact is taken by the paint rather than the metal blades. And you can imagine those blades spinning through pretty coarse dust and sand. It's like just putting a sandpaper across the front of the blades each time it does. So that covers Op Nukem, but late last year our mission expanded to support a separate deployment of UK troops. So Op MINUSMA, or the multi-dimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, led by the Light Dragoons, began in December 2020. The long-range Recce Group deployed to support this United Nations mission, and they do so on 6-month rotations. Their aim was to contribute to improving the UN's mission performance and to help reduce the spread of insecurity across Mali and the wider Sahel. In addition, a key objective was to reach out to those Malian communities who had never met or had never before met the UN forces to understand their needs and concerns, hence the long-range element of the Recce Group's deployment. The Light Dragoon-led task group has been replaced recently by a contingent led by the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment, with personnel drawn from the Queen's Dragoon Guards and other units from across the armed forces. The new UK task group is under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Will Meadows currently. For us, in terms of 13-10 flight, it meant an uplift of 1 additional aircraft, 6 engineers, 2 enablers, and a new red card holder, and that's the senior British military representative who now operates between Op MINUSMA and Op Nukem. He's coming in at the, or she, at the captain, group captain, or full colonel level. So for MINUSMA, our role was to provide 2 very discrete and bespoke medical packages. The first one on the left, option A, is a forward aeromedical evacuation. It's a 3-person team, and it's essentially recovering of the injured service personnel and providing damage control surgery. So before they've received that, akin to what we would refer to as MERT in a theatres operation. On the right, option B, is known as the Tactical Critical Casualty Transfer, and that is collecting on agreement from forward surgical capabilities. So once a patient has been stabilised, they then have the skills to transport the patient. That's a 4-person team, and there's 1 additional technician that can operate between the forward AE and the taxi class. I was fortunate enough that I was deployed whilst we designed and then rolled out this capability into theatre. So thankfully, my previous experience from Iraq and Afghanistan came to the fore. The capability augments an already extensive French and UN Medivac capabilities, so that's medical evacuation capabilities, and they form part of the PACE plan. And PACE stands for Primary, Alternate, Contingency and Emergency. So whilst primarily this capability is to collect UK troops who may be injured on the battlefield, we will then obviously provide that support to any other nation in theatre. I apologise if it's not very loud. One of my aircraft has just returned for a crew change, so hopefully you can still hear me. In terms of the Chinook armament, the Chinook is very well protected. The UK variant is equipped with multiple systems. Clearly, I can only cover the basics here. However, you can find most of this, in fact, all of this on open source. So deployed, we have 2 times M134 Dillon miniguns, each capable of 3,000 rounds per minute. And an M60 7.62 millimeter gun on the ramp. The aircraft has IR countermeasures, ballistic protection throughout, self-sealing fuel tanks, and automatic fire suppression system, in addition to a missile approach warning system. So as I said, the information I briefed is available on open source, but we clearly are very well protected, hence why we have such a global reach to encounter many hostile threats in many different environments. I realise I'm cantering through a lot of these slides, but I really do think the benefit will be towards the end when we have a larger Q&A session. So the next video is a little over 2 minutes long, and it sets the context for Mali going forward, certainly in relation to the French commitment. The video was aired in June this year, so again, we've moved on a little bit, but I do think it is worthy of watch.
Campaign officially began in 2014 to tackle Islamic militants and armed groups across West Africa's Sahel. 5,100 French soldiers are currently deployed in the region, working across Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali and Chad, supported by 100 RAF personnel and 3 Chinook helicopters. British soldiers are also in the region as part of MINUSMA, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. But France's deployment is now set to change. President Emmanuel Macron says Operation Barkhane will come to an end and be replaced by a new multilateral mission.
We will begin a profound transformation of our military presence in the Sahel, which we will describe in more detail in the weeks to come.
Despite some successful French missions in recent months, support for the operation has been wavering for some time. More than 50 French personnel have died, and many have grown frustrated at there being no end in sight. France suspended its operations with Malian forces last week after a military coup, the second to have occurred in Mali in 9 months. In response to the threat last year, the UK deployed up to 250 personnel to Mali, sending soldiers from the Light Dragoons and the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment, to join the UN's 18,000-strong peacekeeping mission. That commitment is set to remain, but the role of the RAF personnel supporting the French mission will now be in doubt.
This isn't that unexpected. The idea, I think, is that France will focus on a much more narrow special forces operation focused on what you might call aggressive anti-terrorism, while leaving the main interaction between security forces and the general population as the national armies.
Mr Macron will reveal more details of how France will end the operation at the end of the month. But after years of violence, the effect the move will have on security in the Sahel will take much longer to assess. Carla Prater, Forces News.
So what next? It's clear that the French mission is changing. We saw that when we were deployed this time around. Anecdotally, the French mission expected to go out for not very long at all. So to still be there 8 years on and to a similar footing, the cost of, I hate to guess, but many millions of euros, it's understandable that they're willing to transition to something different. And that multilateral mission, I still don't know personally what that will be or involvement we will play there. However, what is clear is that MINUSMA is coming to the end of its 2nd rotation, and it still has 4 more to come. And you can see certainly a UK sovereign medevac capability for the longevity of their tour. For my squadron, so we've just entered our pre-deployment training phase, and I plan to deploy 3 of my flights starting in January, relieving 18 squadron as I do so, and they will conduct a rotation of up to 16 each. And actually, if the French are withdrawing or indeed changing, then I expect we could be busy, very busy, because a lot of what they need will be heavy lift in terms of troops, freight, personnel, and vehicles, and that's what we bring to the party. That said, on the next slide, you can see we have been pretty busy. So I did a snapshot from us deploying in July 2018 to July this year, just to give you the 3 years worth of tasking we provide. And as you can see, that's 3,211 hours, just shy of 20,000 troops transported, just shy of 2,000 tons, and that's over 2,000 sorties. Of note, and leads back to my observation earlier about the blades and the conditions we find ourselves operating in, of the 1,660 landings, not including GAO, and GAO would be back to a hard standing, so it's a runway, 400 of those so a little over 20% have been to a non-established site. And those sites are pretty harsh in terms of the dust to sand, and as per that kind of middle sector of Mali is pretty challenging. In terms of the kind of things we have been doing in addition to trooping, and it popped up on the roles and equipment earlier, so FARE, which is forward resupply. So for us, we will take 1 or 2 of our CH-47s, we'll fill them with fuel. We also have the ability to put internal fuel tanks, each capable of holding 3 tons, and we can take up to 3 of those inside. And we can position them forward and then set up a number of hoses. So the French troops who are deployed forward can obviously have that reach and endurance to be able to conduct operations at greater reach than they normally would, whilst operating from main operating bases or forward operating bases. And who knows, that we could see ourselves involved in some more missions of that type as the number of mobs and fobs start to draw down. Coming up on 35 minutes, so I'm 10 minutes ahead of where I planned to be, but hopefully you found that informative. Hopefully I've been able to tell you something you didn't already know or haven't been able to Google. I do thank you for your patience. I hope the noise of the Chinook in the background is not too distracting. And for me, this is now where the presentation really comes to its own, in that I get to engage with you. So if you want me to clarify anything, please feel free to do so, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And again, I just caveat that with, by these means, it will be on class, and it will be from me, that is PB AC27. So thank you, and George, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll share again my screen. So, okay, so we're now moving to the Q&A session that will be coordinated by our Technical Vice President, David Niven. So, David, over to you.
Okay, Paul. Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have, just to start off the questions, a couple of questions. You talked about the climate and the problems in May and June of sandstorms, thunder, lightning, heavy rain. How predictable was that weather, and what happens when you get caught out in a sandstorm?
Yeah, David, great question. So actually, in terms of Met support, it's the French Met office who provide us with our products. Now, clearly we have the global products we can get through our own Met office, but they're the ones on the ground. So they have Met facility at Gao Airfield, but then their main office is at headquarters in charge of the whole Sahel. So whilst we get reasonable products, the speed at which the weather develops can catch people out. So for a dust storm, and I've been there myself, the best thing to do is to land on and let the thing blow through. Now, if that dust storm goes into the hundreds of miles, which it can do, then that makes it somewhat challenging. In those conditions, we have options to punch up into the cloud and then get a service back at Gao Airfield. Failing that, in an emergency, we can use our internal aids to let down. And that's where we really do use our new DAFIC, so digital flying control system. And we can pick a spot in the desert using our radar bar and mappage. We can see there are no obstructions, and we can internally just fly down to that point, normally down to a couple of 100 feet, let the aircraft come to a hover, and then holding that GPS hover perfectly, which the aircraft will do, just let down slowly to make sure there's no obstructions. So we're pretty well placed, but yes, it is a challenge.
Okay, yeah, well, that's very interesting. You didn't mention any operations at night. Are you operating at night, or is that just not on?
No, we do. We operate by day and by night. Everywhere we go as a two, so there's always mutual support. I'd say the majority of our support to the French has been by day, but it's not necessarily constrained to just the hours of daylight. So no, we do fly by night. Most of what I've done in the past has been by night for operational and tactical reasons. So it's quite nice to be able to see things for a change, not through green toilet tubes. But no, we have a blend and a mix of both, and we have the capability to do both.
Thank you. Well, we're getting some questions coming through now, so I'll just read out this first one. and it's about the brownout impact. Is this brownout mostly, the impact has mostly been on blade erosion, or are there engine issues associated with brownout? And obviously there's a degraded visual environment for the aircrew. But just say a few more words about blade erosion and the impact on engines.
Yeah, of course, another great question. So at the blade erosion, we refer to it as blade tape. And it's a tape or a paint. We paint on the leading edge of the blades. And it's designed to take the majority of that impact. And if we conduct multiple desert landings and encounter the brownout, well, then we need to historically change that blade tape. Now, in other theatres, the sand is less coarse, so you might get away for 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 sources where you don't need to redo the blade tape. Whereas in Mali, it seemed to have to happen at the end of every day. So it just gives you an indication of the coarseness of the sand that we're certainly finding. In relation to engines, we have something called an EAPS, which is an air inlet particle separator. So we only have them when we deploy to DV, so degraded visual environments such as Arctic or desert. And what that does is it filters out all of those particles and it puts them around the engine. So the engine should and does just get clean air. So actually the engines fare pretty well. Without them, I agree, the ingestion of dust and the coarseness of the sand we encounter would have quite an impact on the engines and certainly the engine blades. As for crews operating in those conditions, we train synthetically here at Odium and up the road at RAF Benson. And then we conduct pre-deployment training in a different location, be that in Africa itself, in the US, or somewhere such as historically we've gone to Jordan or Morocco. So we really do prepare our people as best we can, both synthetically and environmental training. And then when we get in theatre, now that we have the digital AFCS, it actually creates far less instances where we may have dinks and prangs. And certainly for the Chinook and similar to my previous type of Merlin, any lateral movement at the bottom end is a no-no because you can buckle those wheels. And certainly when you're operating at the weights we are operating at the Chinook, so routinely 18 plus tons. But it really is a capacity builder having the upgraded system. Hopefully that, I've rattled on a little bit, but hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, well, thank you. In fact, there's a follow-on question here about the use of the digital automatic flying control system, and I think you probably answered that, but you might wish to expand a little on just how good that is in the brownout situation.
So I mean, it really is that good. So, and just an example, and part of the training we do to let our crews build confidence in the system. So I will take them here to the Underston Low Park, and it could be red loom, so at night, so they've not got very good references. And you can put a hover hold in, and you can put a height hold. And then I can ask them to climb, and we can use, there's two versions. You can use a course, so you compress the mag spring and you pull the aircraft, the collective up, and it will do it that way. Or you can mash up, which is essentially pushing a button so you go up and down. And whilst doing that, I'll get them to conduct rotations, so 360s, and you can go to whatever height you'd like. So normally you take them to 800, 1,000 feet at night. And then I'll get them to do the opposite, so descend, rotate the other way, so going through 6 or 7 rotations, and they will go down to the exact same position on the ground that they left. So if you transpose that to the desert and how we fly our approaches, so clearly we're not coming to the hover at any great height, but we will fly a gate approach, and at the bottom of that gate approach, we'll engage the holds. And in theory, those holds will take us to a usual Chinook hover of 20 to 25 feet over the ground, at which point you can just lower the lever in a matter of seconds and you're on the ground. So it takes most of the skill, but not all of it, most of the skill out of what we do, but it also takes a lot of the risk out of what we do as well.
Okay, thank you. We've got really a question here about engineering. how is the availability of the aircraft affected by this, brownout situation, but also because of the operations in the desert? And you talked about the sand, and I know there's different sand around the world. So how does the operation in this environment affect availability of aircraft? And you've only got a team of 100, I think you said there, and that includes the air crew. So I'm not sure how many engineers you've got. I guess they're pretty heavily committed each day to keeping your aircraft serviceable.
So you're right, and another great question. So when we first deployed to Mali, we were deployed with 3.25 crews. So that gives me 3 crews, and the 0.25 is an authorizer who can authorize the crews day on, day off. With the rollout of Medivac and MINUSMA, we went up by an additional crew, so we're down to up to 4.25. And we increased from 35 engineers. So of that 100, only 35 are engineers, to 40. So which, as you alluded to, David, is not a huge number of engineers to engineer 4 aircraft. And certainly when we have to keep one of those aircraft at notice to move 24/7. The conditions don't impact the aircraft other than the blades, as I alluded to, or the collection of just dust everywhere, more so or less so than being in the UK. What can impact is heat soak. So if you heat soak an aircraft, leave it out in some of the conditions, and it's 40 plus in the summer in Mali, well then that can have a detrimental effect on some of those systems. And certainly, when you look at expanding oil, hydraulics and that kind of thing. So we do endeavour to keep them under shelter where we can, for as long as we can. To be honest, the real impact on engineering is just sheer location and the distance we are from home base. So, and whilst we have a deployed spares package and we try and anticipate and predict, and we use a bit of science to do so as to what parts we may need to replace and when, you can never account for the one time a part just either goes or fails, and then the time it takes to get that part out of theatre. So the impact is pretty severe and the conditions are pretty severe, but it doesn't seem to affect aircraft availability that much. What we do have, and it's quite unique and novel, we have it when we deploy to dusty areas, is in the front you'll have a can of compressed air and a paintbrush, because the dust gets into everything. So even when I'm trying to push buttons on my mission management system, they get full of dust. So you will often find a Chinook pilot with a paintbrush and a can of compressed air, try and clear the dust out of those systems. And then when those aircraft return to the UK, you'd be surprised, I haven't got a figure, but how much sand is actually embedded in and around the aircraft.
Yeah. Okay, yes, that's very very useful, very interesting. And you've just touched actually on the long line of communication from the UK to Mali. I mean, how effective is this line of communication? I mean, the distances are incredible. So, do you often anticipate, or are there long delays in getting resupplies?
So we have something called the West African Air Bridge, which is what supports us. And the aircraft that do support us is routinely an A400, which is a new fleet, or the C-17. Now, the A400 being a new fleet has its issues, a number of teething problems, which means the availability of fleet is not always best. But also we're still committed elsewhere, certainly in the Middle East, and have been until fairly recently into other locations. So there is a priority call on some of those, and sometimes we don't always get priority, but we are routinely served. However, some operations such as pitting, for Afghanistan, the evacuation there, clearly the focus shifted. And then the West African Air Bridge obviously was less supported than it had been previously. So the more impact I would suggest is those changing weather conditions. So GAO often goes to brownout, at which point you could have a C-17, which is on its way from the UK. The weather's fine, the conditions change. You can see the aircraft, albeit through pretty poor slant viz, in the overhead, and the aircraft has to return to base because it just hasn't got the correct conditions to make a landing. That's the most frustrating, as I'm sure you can imagine, when you see your spares at 10,000 feet and you can't get hold of it. But in the main, we're pretty well supported.
Okay, another question here, which is an interesting one I hadn't thought of, and that is, would skids be more useful in certain situations that you meet in the desert and in Mali in general?
So that's interesting. And going back to my Bell 412 days, the skids would have been great because you'd slide on. But I suppose for Mali, I would have to say no in the main, because the majority of where we fly to, whilst it is sand, that sand is normally accumulated in amongst rocky outcrops. So the ability to slide on with an aircraft of our size and then hitting those outcrops would be pretty tricky. We do use skids when we go to the Arctic to stop us from obviously sinking in the snow, as it has a good displacement. But no, as I don't think anyone's talked about skids in the desert, but I think if we went somewhere very sandy, I could definitely see utility in using them.
Okay, well, thank you. The next question is, do you have any information on the percentage of different missions that you're flying? Which mission is the most common, and which is the least likely?
Sorry, by mission, do you mean operations, as in Newcomb versus MINUSMA, or as in the type of mission we're flying?
The type of mission that you're flying.
Yeah. So predominantly, I'd say 90% of what we do in Mali is trooping and internal, external freight. So, and we normally do both of those concurrently. So the majority of what I did in theatre was fly French troops from A to B, or equipment vehicles, etc. from the same. So it's only a very small percentage would be doing anything different. And as I alluded to, that's normally kind of fair or potentially something along those lines. But yeah, 95, if not higher percent, is trooping and freight.
Okay. The next question is that you may not be able to answer this, is enemy activity, is it enemy activity an issue for you, or because of the way you operate and the areas that you operate in, there is no enemy activity?
Yeah, so the bounds of our operating capability is to remain clear from known enemy activity. So whilst the French would move forward to those locations, we would support them, but we would never get close enough that we would see that the enemy or indeed any of the activity that's ongoing. Now, clearly they are the known knowns. So, and as we move around the AO, we do see what you would classify as fighting age males, or some of the TTPs that some of the hostile groups would operate to. But our role is not to get involved in that direct combat, and certainly during my 3 months there, I didn't see any such. Hopefully that. I mean, you can't always account for the enemy. Our tactics and our DAS is certainly very well protected against them. We mitigate it as best we can for the unknown unknowns by flying at height. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. The next question is: do you have any interaction with Mali aircraft, such as the Embraer 314, the Tucano Alpha 29? Do you ever see them?
So I have. I've seen them once or twice, and there was a crashed one at the end of Gower Airfield. In fact, that was an old Marley MiG. But no, we don't routinely see or work with them. Clearly, at Gower, there's a multitude of different aircraft types from different nations. We work solely with the French currently. But no, we don't really have any interaction with the Malian Air Force.
Okay, thank you. The next question is all about performance in the environment of Mali. Hot and high performance is an issue, long-standing issue for any helicopter. So what's the direct impact on your operations in terms of payload, range, and endurance? I know you touched in your presentation on range and restrictions, but maybe you could expand on all that, please.
Yeah, of course. So, Lucy, we're normally 13 tons. It's the basic bulk mass of the aircraft, and we probably have 3 tons of fuel is what we put in, and that gives us, suitable flying time for about 2.5 hours at 120 knots, so 240 nautical miles an hour. So that's the kind of range we work to. And then when we look at the payload, I would say at the heat of the summer, if we're above 19 tons, so between 4 and 5 tons of internal or external freight and payload, then we're just getting close to that kind of top of our performance. And that's when I'm talking, plus 40, 1,000 feet above, sea level, which is where we are routinely in Gao and around the Hombury stacks, etc. Whereas in the winter time, or towards the end of the year and through Christmas into the spring, we can operate to the full extent, which is up towards 22, 23. So the 8 tons available payload starts to come into its fore there. So we gain another 3 ton. Now we can offset some of that fuel versus payload, which is standard sport helicopter practice, and therefore we may need to use our FARP capability if there's not a fuel available at the mobs. But the French have pretty good provision at FOBs and mobs for fuel, because many of their aircraft, obviously, whilst they want to operate at range, they don't have particularly the legs. When you look at the NH90 or indeed the Gazelle, Super Puma is pretty good. Tiger actually impressed me. Tiger with its external fuel tanks can go for a very long time and performs quite well actually in hot and high. But yes, it's like I say, it's a real challenge, certainly for the crews who haven't deployed in a hot and high environment, to start to realise not limitations per se, but the extended kind of envelope of the Chinook and how it starts to get squeezed when you're working in those conditions.
Okay, thank you. The next question is really about any additions you'd like to see to your Chinooks to help you, on your mission. You've been very positive about the 2 types that you have, but is there anything that you would wish to have to make the mission easier?
Oh well, where do I get started? I suppose in Mali a weather radar would be quite useful. If I had a shopping list of things I'd like. I've seen some rather impressive next generation day-night goggles with using white phos would be a capability enhancer and turning night into day quite literally. I think our mission management system and what we use could be better. So we have a multitude of different systems which you have to back up, and there's not a one size fits all. That would certainly enable us to do a bit more. But otherwise, they kind of got it right with the Chinook, and I didn't come in naively or not want to like when I saw him coming from an external force. You always feel like a bit of an outsider, as I did coming from the Merlin. But then you come to the Chinook and you go, oh, actually, everything they do shout about comes to the fore. It really is a great aircraft.
That's useful. But anything that would help the engineers in supporting the mission?
I guess we could, if we deployed greater spares package, so a more comprehensive spares package, owing to the ranges we operate to, i.e. for the air bridge, so from the UK to Mali, then that would certainly enhance them. Again, I think the engineering it used to be very simple on the Chinook. It's made difficult. It's slightly more complex by the digital upgrades we have. But in the main, I don't really think they would ask for anything other than availability of spares and the tooling, which clearly if you're deployed, you get priority on. But we can't have a bottomless pit of spares, unfortunately. We don't have all those long lead items such as gearboxes and engines, etc. So we have enough, but you can never have too many in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. And actually, one final question now. I suppose this is inevitable. The number of Chinooks, is it enough for the operation? Is there a need for more in Mali? What would your view be?
So the maximum, if you see aircraft 984, which is on my squadron at the moment, it's one with the 40th anniversary decals, in between the 2 ramps, on the back of the ramp, is the answer is 2 Chinooks. What's the question? It is kind of synonymous with Chinook operations. I think Normally you'd have two, which works, really well for whatever they ask. Now we're doing 2 bespoke missions, and 4 is appropriate in providing they work. I think if you ask the French, they they clearly want more. I think the question is probably not the number of aircraft, but the number of hours available. So we contracted with them to provide 100 hours a month. I'm sure if they could, they would fly much more, because they've seen what a capability enhancer the Chinook really does bring to the party. And certainly when you operate in hot and high into the ranges that Mali presents. Yeah, so yeah, the answer is 2, but I will always take more.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Paul. I'm going to bring it to a close now, and I'd really like to thank you for, the effort that you've put into this presentation. I know we've, had discussions beforehand as well. It's been extremely interesting, and I'm sure that the audience would like to join me in thanking you at Zoom. So we're not able to clap, but collectively, on behalf of the Vertical Flight Society and all those who have logged in, a very big thank you for what you've told us and just how honest you've been about the conditions and the effect on the aircraft. I think the audience has found this very useful, and it's a part of the world that I don't think any of us were aware of, and just how big and how difficult it was to operate in Mali. So thank you for the presentation, and at that I will sign off.
No, thanks very much, and all the best, everyone. Hopefully I'll see you around the bazaars, no doubt.
Thank you very much, Paul and David. Thank you very much. I will bring now the presentation and the meeting to an end. Goodbye, everyone, and do stay tuned for the next events organized by our branch.